What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down with daytime television's most controversial panel and refuses to play by their rules? What you're about to hear will shock you. Denzel Washington, the man who's commanded respect in every room he's ever entered, found himself in the fight of his life against hosts who thought they could corner him. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in standing your ground when the deck is stacked against you. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about media manipulation. The atmosphere in the View studio was already tense before Denzel Washington even took his seat. The legendary actor had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest directorial project. But what started as a routine publicity stop was about to become one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. As the cameras rolled and the theme music faded, you could cut the tension with a knife. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting in her familiar spot as moderator, opened with what seemed like a friendly enough greeting. "Denzel Washington, welcome back to The View. It's always a pleasure to have you here." Denzel nodded politely, his trademark calm demeanor intact. "Thank you for having me, Whoopi. Good to see you again." But Joy Behar, never one to waste time with pleasantries, immediately jumped in with a loaded question that would set the tone for everything that followed. "Denzel, before we talk about your new film, I have to ask about some of the comments you've made recently about personal responsibility in communities. Some people are saying your views are outdated and don't acknowledge systemic issues. How do you respond to that criticism?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Denzel's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. He had walked into an ambush disguised as an interview. "Joy, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what I've said." Denzel replied carefully, "I've never denied that systemic issues exist. What I've said is that we also have to take responsibility for what we can control in our own lives and communities. Both things can be true at the same time." Sarah Haynes, attempting to play peacemaker, as she often did, tried to steer the conversation towards safer ground. "Denzel, your new film deals with themes of redemption and second chances. Can you tell us about what drew you to this particular story?" But Joy wasn't finished. She had clearly come prepared for battle, and Denzel's measured response had only emboldened her. "But Denzel, when you say things like that, aren't you essentially victim-blaming? Aren't you telling people who are struggling because of centuries of oppression that it's their fault?" The studio fell silent. Even the usually chatty audience seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Denzel leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Joy, I'm going to stop you right there. That's not what I said, and that's not what I believe. What I said was that while we fight against systemic injustice, which we absolutely must do, we also have to empower ourselves and our children with education, with values, with the belief that they can overcome obstacles. Those aren't contradictory ideas." Alyssa Farah Griffin, the newest member of the panel, seemed uncomfortable with the direction the interview was taking. "I think what Denzel is saying makes a lot of sense. You can acknowledge problems in the system while also encouraging personal empowerment." But Joy was on a mission. She had apparently decided that this was her moment to take down someone she viewed as not progressive enough for her liking. "But Denzel, when you have your platform and your privilege, don't you think it's irresponsible to put any burden on communities that are already struggling? Shouldn't we be focusing entirely on changing the system?" This was the moment when Denzel's famous composure began to show cracks. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. "Joy, let me tell you something. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. My mother was a beauty shop owner. My father worked multiple jobs. We didn't have privilege handed to us. What we had was a mother who wouldn't let us use circumstances as an excuse not to excel. She taught us that yes, the world might be unfair, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to be better." Sunny Host, who had been quiet up to this point, decided to join the fray. "But Denzel, surely you can see how your message might be interpreted as minimizing the real barriers that exist." Denzel turned to face Sunny directly, his eyes flashing with an intensity that reminded everyone why he was such a commanding presence on screen. "Sunny, I'm not minimizing anything. I'm saying that we can acknowledge barriers and still refuse to be defeated by them. When I talk to young people, I tell them the truth. The system might be rigged against you, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting. That doesn't mean you stop believing in yourself. The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Whoopi, clearly sensing that things were spiraling out of control, tried to regain control of the interview. Let's take a step back here, Denzel. I think what everyone's trying to understand is how we balance acknowledging systemic problems with encouraging personal responsibility. But Joy wasn't backing down. If anything, Denzel's passionate defense of his position seemed to fuel her determination to break him down. But Denzel, when you say things like that, you're essentially doing the work of people who want to ignore racism and inequality. You're giving them cover to say, see, even Denzel Washington agrees that it's really about personal responsibility. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Denzel's hands, which had been resting calmly on the arms of his chair, slowly clenched into fists. That accusation was the match that lit the fuse. For a moment, the studio was so quiet you could hear the camera operators breathing. Then Denzel Washington did something that no one in that room expected. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a diplomatic smile, but the kind of smile that appears before someone delivers a verbal knockout punch. Joy, let me get this straight, Denzel said, his voice now carrying a dangerous calm that made everyone lean forward. You're sitting here telling me that when I encourage young people to take control of their education, to respect themselves and their communities, to not let circumstances define their futures, I'm somehow doing the work of racists. Is that really what you just said to me? Joy, perhaps realizing she had pushed too far, but unable to back down now, doubled down with the kind of reckless abandon that had made her both famous and infamous. I'm saying that your message, intentionally or not, reinforces the narrative that systemic racism isn't the real problem. That if people just worked harder, everything would be fine. The words hit Denzel like a slap across the face. His composure, legendary in Hollywood for decades, finally cracked. He stood up from his chair, not in anger, but with the kind of quiet dignity that commanded attention from everyone in the room. Let me tell you something, Joy. I've been fighting racism longer than some of your viewers have been alive. I've been in rooms where I was the only person who looked like me, fighting for opportunities, fighting for respect, fighting to tell stories that matter. Don't you dare sit there and lecture me about what I do or don't understand about systemic racism. Whoopi tried desperately to regain control. Denzel, please, let's just take a breath here, but Denzel wasn't finished. No, Whoopi, I let her ask her questions. Now she's going to hear my answers. Joy, you want to talk about systemic racism. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. Let's talk about how I had to prove myself over and over again in an industry that didn't always want me there. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't use that as an excuse to stop trying. Sarah Haynes looked visibly uncomfortable, her usual diplomatic demeanor strained as she watched one of Hollywood's most respected figures being pushed to his breaking point. Denzel, I think we all respect your journey and your achievements. Maybe we can find some common ground here, but Joy was far from finished. Something about Denzel's refusal to back down seemed to trigger an almost manic determination to prove her point. But that's exactly the problem, Denzel. Your individual success doesn't negate the reality that the system is broken. When you tell people to just work harder, you're ignoring the fact that some people are working 3 jobs and still can't get ahead because the system is rigged against them. Denzel turned to face Joy directly, and for the first time since the interview began, his mask of professional courtesy completely fell away. Joy, do you think I don't know about working 3 jobs? Do you think I don't know about struggle? My father was a Pentecostal minister who also worked as a janitor and a barber. My mother cut hair 6 days a week to help make ends meet. Don't lecture me about hard work. Alyssa Farah Griffin, clearly sensing that the interview was careening toward disaster, tried to inject some sanity into the conversation. I think both perspectives have merit. We can acknowledge that systemic issues exist while also celebrating the importance of personal agency and determination. But Joy wasn't interested in finding middle ground. She was in full attack mode now, apparently convinced that she was fighting some kind of righteous battle. But Denzel, surely you can see how dangerous it is when someone with your platform essentially tells people that if they're not succeeding, it's because they're not trying hard enough. That's victim blaming, plain and simple. The accusation of victim blaming was the final straw. Denzel's eyes flashed with an intensity that reminded everyone in the room why he had been able to portray some of cinema's most powerful characters. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience and struggle. Victim blaming. Victim blaming, Joy. Let me tell you what victim blaming really is. Victim blaming is telling young people that the deck is so stacked against them that there's no point in trying. Victim blaming is convincing entire communities that they're powerless to change their circumstances. What I'm doing is the exact opposite. I'm telling people they have more power than they think. Tsunami host, perhaps sensing that Joy had gone too far, tried to offer a more nuanced perspective. Denzel, I think what Joy is trying to say is that individual success stories, while inspiring, don't solve systemic problems that require collective action and policy changes. Denzel nodded towards Sunny, acknowledging her more measured approach. Sunny, you're absolutely right. Individual success doesn't solve systemic problems, but individual failure doesn't solve them either. We need both. We need people fighting to change unjust systems, and we need people refusing to be defeated by those systems while we work to change them. But Joy couldn't let it go. It was as if she had decided that breaking Denzel Washington on national television would be her crowning achievement. But when you emphasize personal responsibility over systemic change, you're essentially doing the work of people who want to maintain the status quo. You're giving them ammunition to say that racism isn't really the problem. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to stop moving. Denzel stood there for a long moment, staring at Joy with an expression that was part disbelief, part anger, and part something that looked almost like pity. "Joy," he said finally, his voice now carrying a coldness that made everyone in the room shiver. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have spent my entire career trying to open doors for people who look like me. I have used my platform to tell stories about struggle, about injustice, about overcoming impossible odds. I have mentored countless young actors and filmmakers. I have donated millions of dollars to education and community programs. And you have the audacity to sit there and suggest that I'm doing the work of racists." Whoopi, realizing that the situation was completely out of control, made one last desperate attempt to salvage the interview. "Denzel, Joy, let's everybody just take a step back here. We're all on the same side. We all want the same things." But Denzel shook his head slowly, his decision clearly made. "No, Whoopi. We're not all on the same side. Some of us believe in empowering people, and some of us believe in keeping them dependent on our sympathy. Some of us believe in telling people they can overcome, and some of us believe in telling them they're victims who can't help themselves." Joy, perhaps realizing that she had pushed one of Hollywood's most respected figures too far, tried to backtrack slightly. "Denzel, I never said people can't help themselves. I'm saying that acknowledging systemic barriers isn't the same as giving up, but it was too late." Denzel had reached his breaking point, and what happened next would become the most talked about moment in The View's history. Denzel looked at Joy with the kind of stare that could freeze water, then slowly reached down and unclipped his microphone. The gesture was so deliberate, so final that everyone in the studio knew exactly what it meant. This interview was over and it was ending on Denzel's terms. "You know what, Joy," Denzel said, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in every corner of Hollywood for over 4 decades. "I came here as a courtesy. I came here to talk about a film that deals with redemption, with second chances, with the power of human dignity. Instead, you've turned this into some kind of political hit job where you're trying to paint me as some kind of enemy of my own people." Joy, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of what she had done, tried to interrupt. "Denzel, that's not what I know." Denzel cut her off with a wave of his hand that carried such finality that Joy actually stopped talking mid-sentence. "You've had your say. Now you're going to listen to mine. You sit here every day on national television and you think you have the right to lecture people about their struggles, about their communities, about what they should and shouldn't believe. But let me ask you something, Joy. When was the last time you spent time in the communities you claim to be defending? When was the last time you talked to a young person who's trying to make something of themselves despite the odds?" The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Alyssa Farah Griffin was staring at the table, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Even Sunny host, usually so quick with a response, seemed stunned into silence. Whoopi made one final attempt to salvage the situation. Denzel, please, let's not end things like this. We can agree to disagree and still have a respectful conversation. Denzel turned to Whoopi, and for a moment his expression softened slightly. Of all the hosts, she was the one he had the most history with, the most respect for. Whoopi, I respect you and I respect what you've built here, but I will not sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks that encouraging people to believe in themselves is somehow harmful to the cause of justice. He turned back to Joy, who was now looking decidedly less confident than she had at the beginning of the interview. Joy, you want to know what's really harmful. What's harmful is telling people that they can't succeed because the system is against them. What's harmful is convincing communities that they're powerless. What's harmful is taking away hope and replacing it with grievance. Joy tried one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. But Denzel, you're mischaracterizing. Everything I've said, I never said people can't succeed. I'm talking about the need to address systemic issues. Denzel shook his head slowly, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Joy, the problem isn't that you don't understand systemic issues. The problem is that you don't understand people. You don't understand that you can acknowledge a rigged game and still play to win. You don't understand that you can fight injustice while also refusing to be defined by it. He stood up fully now, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. I've spent my career playing characters who refuse to be victims of their circumstances. Malcolm X, Reuben Carter, Frank Lucas, even Fence's Troy Maxson. These were men who understood that the world was unfair, but they didn't let that understanding paralyze them. They fought anyway. They believed anyway. They demanded respect anyway. Alyssa tried one more time to find middle ground. Denzel, I think everyone here agrees that your characters and your personal journey are inspirational. Maybe we're just talking past each other here. But Denzel wasn't interested in diplomatic solutions anymore. Joy had crossed a line, and he was going to make sure everyone understood exactly where that line was. No, Alyssa, we're not talking past each other. The difference is crystal clear. Some people believe in empowerment, and some people believe in victimhood. Some people believe in lifting people up by telling them they're capable of greatness, and some people believe in keeping them down by convincing them they're helpless. Joy, her face now flushed with a combination of anger and embarrassment, made one final attempt to salvage her position. That is absolutely not what I believe, and you know it. I believe in fighting for justice and equality. Denzel's response came with the kind of devastating precision that had made him one of the most powerful actors of his generation. Joy, you can't fight for someone's equality while simultaneously telling them they're too weak to fight for themselves. You can't demand respect for people while treating them like they're incapable of earning it. And you certainly can't claim to be helping communities while telling them that anyone who succeeded from those communities is somehow betraying them. The implications of what Denzel was saying hit everyone in the room like a thunderbolt. He wasn't just defending his own positions anymore. He was calling out the fundamental contradictions in the worldview that Joy had been promoting. Sunny made one last attempt to bridge the gap. Denzel, I think there's room for both perspectives here. We can fight systemic injustice while also celebrating individual achievement and responsibility. Denzel nodded towards Sunny with genuine respect. Sunny, you get it. That's exactly right. But your colleague here seems to think that anyone who emphasizes personal responsibility is somehow the enemy. She seems to think that inspiring people to overcome obstacles is the same as ignoring that the obstacles exist. He picked up his microphone pack from the chair and began walking toward the edge of the set. I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've seen real racism, real discrimination, real barriers. I've also seen what happens when people refuse to let those barriers define them. The difference between inspiration and victim mentality isn't about ignoring problems. It's about refusing to be defeated by them. Joy, clearly realizing that she was about to lose control of the entire narrative, made one final desperate play. Denzel, if you walk out of here like this, you're just proving that you can't handle being challenged on your views. Denzel stopped walking and turned back to face her one final time. The look he gave her was one that would be replayed on social media for weeks to come. It was a look that combined disappointment, disgust, and something that looked almost like pity. Joy, I've been challenged by directors, producers, critics, and audiences for 4 decades. I've been challenged by some of the smartest, most accomplished people in the world. Being challenged doesn't bother me. What bothers me is being misrepresented by someone who thinks that tearing down successful people somehow helps unsuccessful. Once he walked to the edge of the set, then turned back one final time to address not just the hosts, but the cameras directly. To anyone watching this, especially young people, don't let anyone convince you that believing in yourself is somehow wrong. Don't let anyone tell you that working hard and demanding excellence from yourself is betraying your community. And don't let anyone make you feel guilty for succeeding despite the obstacles. With that, Denzel Washington walked off the View set, leaving behind a panel of hosts who were struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Joy sat there in stunned silence, perhaps finally realizing that she had just been schooled by a master. The other hosts scrambled to fill the dead air, but everyone knew that nothing they could say would matter after what they had just witnessed. The legendary actor had delivered a masterclass in dignity, strength, and the power of standing up for your principles, even when the odds are stacked against you. He had shown that true empowerment comes not from convincing people they're victims, but from inspiring them to rise above their circumstances and demand the respect they deserve. What did you think of Denzel's response to Joy's accusations? Do you think he was right to walk off the set? Or should he have stayed to continue the debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you subscribe for more stories that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling and the gloves come. Who do you think was right in this argument? Comment below.